A land of black volcanic mountains stood silent against a rising sun, its jagged edges carved by time, its fortresses towering so high they seemed to scrape the sky itself. For centuries, travelers whispered about this place with a mix of fear and awe. Khaybar, a stronghold so fortified, so impossibly secure, that entire tribes believed no army on earth could ever penetrate its walls. But behind those massive gates lived a threat that had grown darker with every passing year. Plot after plot had been woven against the believers in Medina. Attempts on the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, were encouraged, funded, and protected by some leaders within these fortresses. As tension escalated, one truth became undeniable. Khaybar, with all its strength and all its pride, had become the center of danger for the Muslim community. Before we go deeper, answer this. From which country are you watching this video? And if your heart finds peace in Islamic history and the beauty of our faith, subscribe to this channel so these stories reach millions more. When the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was signed with Quraysh, many thought the Muslims would finally enjoy a moment of rest. But peace with Makkah did not erase the threat from the north. Now that Quraysh was restrained, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, could finally address the looming danger that had been growing like a shadow over Medina. And that shadow led straight to the towering black walls of Khaybar. Its people were known for their wealth, their fertile lands, their powerful warriors, and their complex network of fortresses that no desert tribe had ever conquered. Every fortress stood upon high ground, protected by steep valleys and sharp volcanic rocks that made any approach difficult and dangerous. Still, the believers knew the time had come. Yet they marched not out of vengeance, not out of desire for dominance, but out of absolute necessity. Khaybar's continued hostility meant that leaving it unchecked would be like ignoring a fire burning quietly behind one's home. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, gathered the believers and made the intention clear. This was a mission to secure Medina from betrayal and assassination attempts, to end the cycle of treachery once and for all, and to establish justice, not oppression. Nearly 1,600 Muslims prepared themselves for the journey. Their weapons were simple, their armor light, and their supplies modest, but their faith was heavier than mountains. As they marched across the desert, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, raised his hands and made a powerful supplication recorded in authentic hadith. O Allah, Lord of the heavens and the earth, Lord of all things, we ask you for the good of this town, its people, and everything within it. The entire army walked with the calm dignity of people who trusted not their own strength, but the decree of Allah. Some companions whispered to one another, wondering how such a small force would face fortresses that had repelled entire tribes for generations. Others walked silently, repeating verses of the Quran under their breath. The harsh desert wind whipped against their clothes, but in their hearts burned a warmth that no storm could extinguish. They were not marching toward a battle. They were marching toward destiny. When the Muslims reached the outskirts of Khaybar under the cover of night, the valley was quiet. The torches along the fortress walls flickered like distant stars. Instead of announcing their arrival, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, instructed the army to remain hidden in strategic positions. He wanted the confrontation to be on Muslim terms, not dictated by the defenders perched high above stone walls. So the army waited in silence as the cold desert air settled around them. Some men took deep breaths, preparing for whatever dawn might bring. Others stared at the silhouette of the fortresses, realizing for the first time just how colossal they were. Yet no one's heart wavered. Their trust was not in numbers or weapons. Their trust was in Allah. As the first light of morning crept across the valley floor, the farmers and workers of Khaybar opened the gates to begin their daily tasks. They stepped forward, baskets in hand, unaware of what awaited them. Then they froze. Beneath the gentle glow of dawn stood an entire army. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. And then, in panic, they shouted the words that echoed through history, recorded in authentic narrations: "Muhammad and the army! Muhammad and the army!" The shout bounced off the stone walls and through the far-reaching valleys. The gates slammed shut with a thunderous clang. War horns blared. Warriors rushed to the battlements, archers prepared their arrows, and commanders barked frantic orders. Khaybar, the city that believed no one could ever surprise it, had been caught completely off guard. For the Muslims, that moment was a sign. Allah had already shaken the hearts of their enemies before a single weapon had been raised. While the defenders scrambled in fear, the believers stood steady and focused, their hearts filled with a calm certainty. The one who brought them here would carry them through whatever came next. Far from being intimidated by the towering walls, the Muslims felt a new strength washing over them, a strength rooted not in physical power, but in divine assurance. Behind those massive fortresses lay the greatest test the believers had ever faced. But with the help of Allah, even the unbreakable could be broken. When the first clash at Khaybar began, it was not marked by a sudden roar of battle, but by a slow tightening of tension, like a desert storm building on the horizon. The Muslims positioned themselves before the first major stronghold, a fortress named Naim, whose towering walls rose from the black volcanic rock like the spine of a beast. Its defenders watched from the battlements with arrows drawn and shields ready, confident that no force standing outside their gates could ever bring those walls down. Then for generations, Naim had repelled attacks with ease, and the people inside believed that this day would be no different. Yet what they did not understand was that the Muslims had not come merely with weapons. They had come with unwavering purpose and hearts anchored in the certainty of Allah's promise. The siege began with a steady push rather than a reckless charge. The believers closed in with discipline, their shields lifted, their lines tight, moving forward with the kind of unity that struck fear even before their blades did. Stones from catapults launched by the defenders crashed into the ground around them, sending clouds of dust rising like smoke. Arrows whistled through the air, stinging the sand and bouncing off shields, but the Muslims advanced step by step, unshaken. They had endured years of hardship, from the battles of Badr and Uhud to the trench of Ahzab. Now they faced a threat unlike any before, massive stone fortresses built on heights that required enormous strength and even greater patience to overcome. Days passed. The sun scorched the valley by day, and the cold bit sharply at night, yet the believers remained in position, rotating shifts, maintaining pressure, refusing to let the defenders rest. Inside the fortress, anxiety grew. Supplies began to tighten, and doubts whispered in the minds of men who had once believed their walls were invincible. Eventually, the constant pressure, combined with the believers' persistence and tactical maneuvers, forced the defenders to weaken. The Muslims finally broke through the outer defenses of Naim, claiming the first of many victories to come. The fall of Naim sent shockwaves through the remaining fortresses. What was once thought impossible had now become undeniable. The Muslims were not leaving, and they were not weakening. They had come for justice, and they would see it through to the end. With the first fortress fallen and the defenders shaken, the Muslims prepared for the next stage of the campaign. As the believers gathered around the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, their hearts beat with anticipation. They knew that the next fortress, one of Khaybar's strongest, would require exceptional leadership and courage. That night, beneath a sky glittering with stars, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, made an announcement that filled the entire camp with electricity. He said, as authentically recorded in Sahih Bukhari, Tomorrow I will give the banner to a man who loves Allah and His Messenger, and Allah and His Messenger love him. Through him, Allah will grant victory." This statement ignited hope in the hearts of every companion present. Many began to wonder, quietly or fervently, whether they would be the one honored by such praise. To be chosen for this task meant that their love for Allah and His Messenger was reciprocated, an honor that no worldly prize could ever match. Through the night, whispers moved through the camp as men discussed who might receive the banner. Omar ibn al-Khattab later admitted with complete honesty that he had never desired leadership except on that night, hoping that he might be the one chosen by the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. But dawn brought a surprise that none expected. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, called out, "Where is Ali ibn Abi Talib?" Ali, who had been suffering from a severe eye ailment that left him struggling to see, was brought forward. With tender mercy, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, applied his blessed saliva to Ali's eyes and supplicated for him. Instantly, Ali's pain vanished, and his sight returned clearer than before. It was a miracle witnessed by those around him, a clear sign that this mission was not merely a human effort, but an endeavor guided by divine support. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, placed the banner in Ali's hands, the atmosphere shifted. A wave of confidence and renewed determination surged through the camp. Ali did not boast, nor did he hesitate. He stood tall, ready to face the fortress that had intimidated so many. The companions understood at that moment that they were witnessing a moment destined to be remembered for centuries, a moment when love, loyalty, and divine favor converged in a single act of leadership. Ali marched forward, carrying the banner of Islam, approaching the fortress of Al-Qamus, the stronghold known for its fierce warriors and its near impenetrable defenses. The defenders, aware of the Muslims' advance, sent out their greatest champion, a warrior named Marhab, whose reputation stretched across the Arabian Peninsula. Marhab stepped forward wearing heavy armor, his sword gleaming beneath the sun, reciting boastful verses that proclaimed his unmatched skill and experience in battle. He declared, "Khaybar knows well that I am Marhab, armed to the teeth, tested and tried." His voice echoed with confidence, perhaps even arrogance, as he looked down on the Muslims approaching his fortress. Yet Ali did not flinch. He stepped forward and responded with a line full of courage and history. "I am the one whom my mother named Haydar. We advance against enemies who deny the truth." These words struck like lightning, not only because they revealed Ali's lineage and bravery, but because they carried the boldness of someone who walked with complete trust in Allah. The duel that followed was fierce, brief, and decisive. Steel clashed, dust rose, and in a moment that would be recounted for generations, Ali struck Marhab down. The fall of Marhab shattered the morale of Khaybar's warriors, who suddenly realized that the Muslims were not merely attackers, they were bearers of a truth they could not overcome. What happened next became one of the most astonishing moments in Islamic history. During the heat of battle, Ali moved toward the fortress gate. With a strength that could only be described as extraordinary, he lifted the massive wooden door of the fortress itself, tearing it from its iron hinges. He used it as a shield, advancing while protecting the believers behind him. Later, several companions tried to lift the same door, and some narrations mentioned that as many as 7 or even more men could not move it. Whether the exact number was 7 or more, one truth remained. What Ali did that day was not the strength of an ordinary man. It was the strength that comes when conviction, courage, and divine aid converge inside a single heart. The defenders of Al-Qamus panicked as their greatest warrior fell, and their fortress gate, once a symbol of their pride, was now in the hands of their enemy. Fear spread across the battlements, and the Muslims surged forward with renewed vigor. The fortress that had stood firm for so long could no longer withstand the advance of men whose hearts had been strengthened by faith. One by one, the defensive lines inside began to collapse until the people of Al-Qamus retreated or surrendered. The Muslims had achieved a victory that seemed impossible just days before. In the chaos that followed the fall of Khaybar's great champion, the air around the fortress thickened with fear, confusion, and disbelief. The defenders had placed their trust in the legendary strength of their warriors, in the seemingly impenetrable gates, and in the towering walls carved into the black volcanic stone. But now, something had happened that no one inside Al-Qamus had ever imagined. The massive wooden door of the fortress, a door so heavy that teams of men struggled to move it during construction, had been torn from its hinges by a single man, Ali ibn Abi Talib. He wielded it not as a barrier but as a shield, striding forward with the confidence of someone who knew that Allah was guiding every step he took. As Ali advanced, holding the huge door between himself and the defenders, the Muslims surged behind him with renewed determination. The defenders unleashed a flurry of arrows and stones, but most of them struck harmlessly against the door as Ali pushed forward. The sound of arrows bouncing off wood echoed through the courtyard like the clatter of distant thunder. Meanwhile, the Muslims advanced from the flanks, pushing the defenders back into their own stronghold with a pressure they could no longer withstand. The fall of Marhab had already cracked their morale, but the sight of their door, once the symbol of their invincibility, being used as a weapon against them, shattered it entirely. Later narrations would marvel at the moment, describing how several strong men attempted to lift the door after the battle and found it nearly impossible to even budge. Some said it took 7 men to move it. Others said more. But every version of the account agreed. What Ali performed that day was not the strength of ordinary human muscle. It was an act fueled by divine support, a moment when Allah allowed his servant to display a power that would be remembered as long as Muslims studied the history of Khaybar. Inside the fortress, panic spread rapidly. Warriors who had once stood tall now retreated deeper into the inner chambers, unsure how to regroup after such a catastrophic blow. Their commanders raised their voices, shouting orders as they attempted to maintain control, but fear had already begun to unravel their defenses. The Muslims closed in from all sides, overwhelming the weakened front lines. Soon, the defenders withdrew, closing the remaining interior gates in a desperate attempt to slow the inevitable. But the momentum of the Muslims had become unstoppable. By midday, the fortress that once boasted unmatched strength had fallen into the hands of the believers, marking a turning point in the entire campaign. The fall of Al-Qamus sent tremors throughout the remaining fortresses of Khaybar. Every stronghold within the region had relied on its own strategic position and defenses, but the psychological blow of losing their greatest champion and the fortress gate was something even stone walls could not protect against. One by one, the Muslim army turned its attention to the surrounding fortresses of Nata, al-Shak, al-Katiba, and others, each perched upon elevated ground and guarded by men who had once believed they were untouchable. Every fortress was constructed differently, taking advantage of natural rock formations for protection. Some had narrow entrances carved into cliffs, forcing attackers to climb steep slopes while exposed to arrows raining from above. Others had deep trenches or thick outer walls designed to break the spirit of any approaching enemy. And yet, fortress after fortress fell, not because the Muslims had superior equipment, but because they had superior resolve. The battles were fierce, and there were moments when defenders fought bravely to protect their families and their land. But the unity of the Muslims, their discipline, and their absolute reliance on Allah gave them an advantage that no stone wall could overcome. Their strategic patience wore down the defenders one layer at a time, like water carving its way through mountains. After each victory, the Muslims would regroup, treat the wounded, bury their martyrs with dignity, and prepare for the next fortress. The campaign was long, but the spirit of the believers never faltered. As the number of standing fortresses shrank, the leaders inside Khaybar began to realize the reality they had tried so hard to ignore. Their fortifications, their weapons, their wealth, their warriors, they had all failed against an army that moved with faith instead of fear. And when the Muslims approached Al-Wati and Al-Sulalim, the last and strongest of the fortresses, those inside already knew that the end was approaching. These final strongholds held the bulk of Khaybar's resources, including food, weapons, and strategic reserves. But even with all of that, their hope was fading. Seeing their earlier fortresses fall, one by one had drained their confidence until it was nothing more than a brittle shell. The Muslims surrounded the final fortresses with the same calm discipline they had shown from the beginning. They cut off supply lines, closed escape routes, and maintained pressure at all times of day. Inside the walls, fear grew into desperation. They realized they could not withstand another lengthy siege. The food inside was dwindling quickly, the morale was shattered, and the people were exhausted. Eventually, the leaders sought terms of surrender. And this is where the story of Khaybar reveals something extraordinary. The Muslims had won, yes. But what came next would show the world that Islam was not a faith of vengeance, but a faith of justice, mercy, and balance. When the fortresses finally surrendered, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, did not command destruction. He did not demand revenge. He did not punish the people with cruelty or force them to leave their homes in humiliation. Instead, he established a peaceful agreement that allowed the inhabitants of Khaybar to continue living on their land and cultivating it. The arrangement was simple. The people would remain as farmers, tending to their crops as they always had, and in return they would give half of the produce to the Muslims. This agreement protected their property, their families, and their livelihoods, while also safeguarding the Muslim community from future betrayal. Narrations in Sahih Bukhari confirm this arrangement clearly, highlighting the Prophet's commitment to fairness even in the moment of total victory. This act of justice surprised many of the defenders. After seeing their fortresses fall and witnessing the strength of the Muslims, they expected harsh punishment or forced displacement. Yet what they received was security and structure, an agreement that allowed them to live with dignity under a new order built on responsibility and mutual obligation. Even after enduring years of hostility and assassination attempts instigated by some of the leaders of Khaybar, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, chose measured justice instead of retribution. This moment became a powerful lesson for all of Arabia. It showed that the Muslims did not fight for conquest or material gain. They fought for safety, justice, and survival. And when victory came, they used it with integrity, demonstrating the beauty of the Islamic moral system. In the days that followed the surrender of Khaybar, life inside the once fortified strongholds shifted from the chaos of war to a cautious, uneasy calm. The dust of battle began to settle, and as the echoes of clashing steel faded into memory, the people of Khaybar found themselves living under a new reality, one shaped not by destruction, but by justice. The fertile lands that had fed generations were still theirs to cultivate. The familiar groves of date palms still rustled in the desert breeze, and their families remained safe inside their homes. But beneath that calm rested a deeper truth. Khaybar had fallen not to brute force, but to a people who lived by a divine moral code, one that demanded fairness even in victory. Among the most unforgettable events in the aftermath was the incident involving the poisoned lamb, a moment that demonstrated both human malice and divine protection. After the Muslims had established the terms of peace, a Jewish woman prepared a roasted lamb and seasoned it with poison, aiming to kill the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. She selected the shoulder, his favorite part, so that the poison would reach him quickly. When the dish was served, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, took a bite, but before swallowing, he stopped. According to authentic narrations, the meat itself spoke, informing him that it had been poisoned. This was a miracle granted by Allah, a protection that shielded his messenger at a moment when no ordinary safeguard could have sufficed. The companions around him were stunned as they realized what had happened. Some had already eaten and were affected, including Bishr ibn al-Bara, who would later die from the poison's effects. The woman responsible was brought forward, and when questioned, she admitted her intention openly. She said she wanted to see if he truly was a prophet. If he survived, then she would accept his claim. Many leaders would have executed her immediately without hesitation, but the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, demonstrated a level of mercy that defied ordinary human instinct. He chose not to punish her himself. It was only when Bishr later died from the poison that the woman was punished according to the law of retribution. This restraint, this calm adherence to justice even when his own life had been threatened, echoed through the hearts of all who witnessed it. These events revealed not only the miraculous protection granted to the Messenger of Allah, but also the disciplined moral structure of Islam. The Muslims did not allow fury to dictate their actions, nor did they retaliate with cruelty. Instead, every decision followed principles of justice, patience, and divine guidance. This was the true victory after Khaybar, not only the capture of fortresses, not only the acquisition of lands, but the triumph of a moral code that turned enemies into protected neighbors and transformed a battlefield into a society built on fairness. The victory at Khaybar soon became a symbol of a much larger truth. The Muslims had faced fortresses carved into mountains, warriors trained for generations, and networks of walls designed to intimidate and repel entire armies. Yet what had brought those walls down was not military superiority, it was belief. The companions understood that every victory they achieved came only by the permission of Allah. Their numbers were small, their equipment simple, and their means limited, but their hearts were steady and their trust unbreakable. In the quiet moments that followed the campaign, many companions reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They remembered the early years in Mecca when they had been persecuted, mocked, beaten, and forced from their homes. They remembered the years of starvation in the valley of Abu Talib, the terror of being surrounded at the Battle of the Trench, and the anguish of seeing their loved ones martyred at Uhud. And now they stood inside the fortresses of Khaybar, witnessing a victory that once seemed impossible. It was a reminder to them of the pattern that Allah had written into their lives: hardship before ease, struggle before triumph, and patience before reward. The Battle of Khaybar also carried a message for the tribes of Arabia. News of the Muslim victory spread rapidly across the desert, carried by travelers, traders, and messengers. Tribes who had once dismissed the believers began to rethink their assumptions. They saw that the Muslims were not simply surviving, they were rising. They saw a community that fought only when necessary, and when they fought with discipline and honor. And when they won, they established order and justice rather than chaos. Many hearts across Arabia softened as they realized that Islam was not merely a growing political force, it was a moral revolution. As the Muslims returned to Medina carrying the spoils of war, the city buzzed with life and gratitude. Families embraced their returning warriors, children ran joyfully through the streets, and the community felt a renewed sense of security. The victory at Khaybar strengthened the economy of Medina, providing food, resources, and stability at a time when the Muslim community had been living with great uncertainty. The arrangement established with the people of Khaybar ensured continuous benefit without oppression, creating a balance that protected both sides. Yet the greatest legacy of Khaybar was spiritual, not material. It proved that faith, when anchored deeply in the heart, could overcome obstacles that seemed immovable. It proved that unity, when grounded in sincerity, could overcome divisions that seemed unbridgeable. And it proved that reliance upon Allah, when held with patience and conviction, could carry a community through any darkness and into any victory. For later generations of Muslims, the story of Khaybar became a reminder that no matter how impossible a situation may appear, the outcome rests only in the hands of Allah. Fortresses may be built from stone, but hearts are built from belief. And when those who believe stand together with sincerity, even the mightiest walls crumble before them. People across the centuries would come to view Khaybar as more than a military campaign. It became a symbol of how Allah elevates a community that stands firm through trial after trial. It became a symbol of mercy in victory and justice in power. And it became proof that when Allah's guidance leads the way, even the strongest barriers, physical or spiritual, cannot stand in its path. As the final moments of the Khaybar story faded into history, its lessons continued to shine. The companions who had walked across the burning desert with exhaustion in their bones now walked with gratitude in their hearts. They understood that their victory was not a prize they had earned through their own strength, but a gift bestowed upon them by the one who knew their struggles, their sacrifices, and their unwavering devotion. The unbreakable fortress had been broken, but more importantly, a new chapter of stability, justice, and divine wisdom had been established. And for all who hear the story today, it remains a timeless reminder that victory, in its truest form, comes only to those who stand in truth, walk with patience, and trust completely in Allah.